Hi, my name is Lucy Wesson. I am a senior at the University of Oregon, studying global studies. For my summer fellowship for CURE this summer, I went to Rwanda and conducted field research on a local women's cooperative. While I was there, I realized that I wanted to dive more deeply into the evolution of women's cooperatives and understand how historical models reflect a current cooperative model that has been wildly successful in the post-conflict environment of Rwanda today. My primary advisor is Professor Will Johnson of the Global Studies Department, and I give him great thanks for advising me throughout this journey. This has been a very valuable learning experience for me. So, a brief overview of cooperatives. The cooperative movement started in the 19th, early 18th century. Obviously, we can find lots of different historical examples of cooperation in different communities. But for the purposes of developing a framework for my thesis paper, I am starting with the cooperative models that were explicitly named cooperatives. To that end, the first recorded cooperative began in 1769 in Fenwick, East Ayrshire, in Great Britain. It formed the Fenwick Weaver Society, and this was really developed as a means of responding to or kind of combating the rapid industrialization of the region. As the cooperative model kind of took hold throughout this part of Europe, the cooperative principles were developed, and the Rothschild principles are still used today, albeit in an updated form. And they include the voluntary and open membership of cooperatives, democratic member control, member economic participation, autonomy and independence, education and training, cooperation among cooperatives, and concern for community. So we have to ask ourselves, how do cooperatives intersect with women? And I think they largely attribute to women's empowerment around the world. Firstly, they are a way to kind of combat gender-based violence and the oppression of women. Female experiences largely, and albeit in many different forms, are embedded within patriarchal systems, and by allowing women to engage with female-led spaces that contribute to poverty alleviation, they are able to kind of step out of those structures of oppression. It also has served as a means, kind of as I noted before, of combating systemic violence. Obviously, cooperatives allow women to earn their own finances, which helps alleviate poverty. And these spaces, as we'll see throughout this presentation, they also have helped women navigate conflict, either during conflict or after it. And as we know, conflict largely targets women in ways very different from men, kind of imposing this double burden onto women as they must care for the household, but also carry their families financially while men are at war or struggling within combat. Lastly, it also helps combat occupational segregation. 50% of women, compared to 77% of men, are employed. Of those employed, they receive 10 to 30% less in wages than their male counterparts. So women's cooperatives are a way of women to access the labor market. It also allows for some mobilization or like upwards mobility within their occupation, which confronts this idea of the glass ceiling, where women can't reach these higher positions within their fields. And then it also allows women to be visible in occupations that don't include like services or housework or agriculture. So one of the cooperatives that I am looking at is the Women's Cooperative Guild. This is one of the first women's cooperatives that kind of fall under that framework of the Rochdale Principles. The Women's Cooperative Guild was formed in 1833 by Alice Ackland and Mary Lawrenson in England. These two women recognized a need for female representation, not only within the labor market, but also within politics. And so they also recognized a need for a separate female organizing space for women to share their experiences either within the household or within the more formal labor market. The structure of the cooperative was based off of this kind of multi-level leadership that was kind of determined by location, because the Women's Guild at its peak was very, very large with almost 900,000 or 90,000 members at its peak. The Guild was a strong advocate for the spread of cooperation, but also women's suffrage and poverty alleviation. And then during the World Wars, they were committed to spreading pacifist ideals to bring their husbands and sons back from war. And the second cooperative that I am looking at is the Nyamirambo Women's Cooperative. This is the Rwandan cooperative that I visited over the summer and did in-person interviews with. The Nyamirambo Women's Center started in 2007. It was formed by 16 women in the Nyamirambo neighborhood of Kigali. It really started as more of an informal support system, as a lot of the women were widowed after the genocide. And since then, it has grown into this like multi tier cooperative that includes not only a storefront, but also a cooperative. There are over 50 women in this cooperative, and there are 2 boards that run both the more formal cooperative and the kind of sales and commerce aspect of the storefront. And some of the achievements, brief achievements of NWC is that the center has provided income and countless trainings in literacy, sewing, computer literacy, hairdressing, and from this, they've engendered a real sense of community in the area, and they also provide support to children and offer like library programs, and so this is an initiative that is really wide reaching and has definitely had impacts beyond the female participants. Marie Aime Umugeni is the current president of Nyamirambo Women's Center, and she told me that she learned everything from the cooperative. It is something that she says she will do for all her life. It is an impact you can see with your eyes. When you empower a woman, you're empowering the family and the country. That is a sentiment that I heard over and over again as I interviewed cooperative members. And I think it speaks to the impact that it has had not only on female participants, but also their larger community in the reconstruction and rebuilding of Rwanda after the 1994 genocide. And so my argument is that despite the distinct spaces, structures, and periods characterizing both the Women's Cooperative Guild in England and the Nyamirambo Women's Center in Rwanda, this paper illustrates how feminist ideologies are localized in cooperative models, enabling women to advocate for their economic and social emancipation and pursue broader goals of peace. A little bit about my methodology. This paper is structured by a literature review and then my analysis and kind of comparative case studies of these two cooperatives. My literature review includes theoretical definitions of cooperation, peace building, and women's empowerment. But I also draw upon practical applications of these terms to kind of ground these ideas in the real world. I also provide some brief and necessary historical background to these concepts. Within my comparative case study, I use historical and qualitative data. Obviously, the historical data is for the Women's Guild and the qualitative data is for the Women's Center. To be able to collect data in Rwanda, I had to undergo the IRB, Human Subjects Research process. I conducted 9 individual semi-structured interviews. All of these were translated on site from Kinyarwanda, and I have since been working on transcribing these interviews to find thematic patterns in my data. And then my research questions are, what is the importance of female-led spaces in conflict/post-conflict environments? What are some of the successes and limitations of women's cooperatives? How is women's empowerment and peace building reflected in these two specific organizations? And then finally, what do the similarities and differences between these two organizations tell us about the evolution and possible trajectories of women's cooperation? And as this is my thesis project and not a summer research paper, I have a lot more research and kind of development to do. And so I would like to take some of this time to instead reflect on my own process as a researcher. I think that since this is such a large project, I have had a lot of trouble managing my time and kind of figuring out how to not only organize myself, but organize large quantities of information. As such, data processing is tedious and it takes a lot of time. And I think I'm still in the process of learning how to find patterns and kind of reflect on such a large quantity of information. The Institutional Review Board also was something that I did not allot enough time for, but I do think it was a very formative part of my research process because it challenged my project and challenged the way that I had kind of thought about my methodology and approach going to interview these communities. And I was grateful to have more formal training in like ethical data collection. And I also am grateful for the process of going and collecting information rather than kind of trying to analyze literature because it has taught me the value of learning to listen to my data and to try and kind of avoid presuppositions about your project and yeah. And then finally, international research. To be forthcoming, my experience doing research in Rwanda was very nuanced. I was a solo female traveler in the country, and I did not have the kind of support that I didn't anticipate needing. And so to that end, I think that if any students are thinking about doing this in the future, which I highly encourage, I would encourage you to set realistic expectations about what kind of resources you need, whether that be just access to certain types of spaces, like academic spaces, Wi-Fi, but also what kind of support you're going to need before you go. Ensure that you have established a support system, not only in country, but also out of country. And finally, some more, I guess, advice for future recipients is to start early. I sure am glad that I have a lot of time to fully develop my ideas and continue working on this project. If you are doing international research, ensure that you have the necessary connections in your host community. A thing about doing international research that I realize is that it's very hard to get nuanced answers from people if you have not established a relationship and lines of trust. And I think that putting the time and energy into connecting with your host family, or not even host family, your host community, is essential to getting credible information. And also think of ways to give back to your host that helps establish long-lasting relationships. And finally, be open and transparent about your process, not only with your advisors who are there to help you along the way, but also to yourself. Research should be sustainable, and it should be invigorating and exciting, and it should really encourage your curiosity rather than burn you out. And so, yes, thank you so much to the Cure team and to my advisors and to the women of the Nyamirambo Women's Center. You all have made this an incredibly formative experience, and I will take these lessons with me for years to come.